Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another day during CUNY's Women's Conference Week. Uh, One of the things that's exciting for us to remember is that the idea of women's growth is not something that we take lightly. This is the fifth year of the CUNY Career Compass for Women Leaders. And this year, our theme, which is leading and mobilizing our communities, is extremely important because we all know that our communities are in need. And again, the great thing about all of this, excuse me, the great thing about all of this is that we get to define our community. We're talking about our women at CUNY leading and mobilizing communities, not only the CUNY community, but whatever communities you feel are in need of assistance or transformation. Leading, and when we talk about leading, we're not talking about leading in the very transactional, micromanaging way of leading. We're talking about helping and guiding people to determine what is important for them and for their communities. And when we're talking about mobilizing, I love the idea of mobilizing because it talks about action. We see so many issues in the world and so many problems in the world. And one of the advantages that we have is that we get to gather ourselves together, make determination about what needs are necessary, and then act. We actualize. We make dreams come true. We make our own dreams come true. We help people recognize the dreams they have, and we help them achieve their dreams. And that to me is something that's incredibly important and transformational. And it's something that our students need, but also all of us need. We also need it. Now, we have been very busy this Women's Week. We actually started last week at Roosevelt House, where we got to hear from an amazing alum of CUNY who works with the mayor. And then we got to hear about artificial intelligence, something that so many of us, I'll say, I'm nervous about. I don't understand it. And we had a wonderful panel talking about artificial intelligence and how it impacts our lives and how it can assist us. Basically, helping us to mobilize and get ready for artificial intelligence. And yesterday, we did something that all leaders need to remember to do. We served. It was a day of volunteerism where we had folks at CUNY go out of CUNY and do work up at Morningside Heights Park and also down in the Bowery. And for folks who weren't able to get away from work and go out of office, there was an opportunity in the central office to put together bags of very important items for women who are in need. And that was also another example of how you lead and mobilize. We didn't do that by ourselves. We actually partnered with the United Way. So I'm just incredibly excited to, I'm sorry, excuse me, be part of a community that recognizes the need that we have to pause, gather together, think about what our needs are, come up with plans to lead one another and work together to come up with solutions and then mobilize as a community to get things done. So I'm just fortunate and so happy to be part of the CUNY community. I not only get a chance to welcome you or do a soft welcome, but I also have the great pleasure of introducing the CUNY Chancellor, Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez. He is the 8th Chancellor of CUNY, and he is the first Chancellor of color and the first Latino to lead CUNY. I think he's really no stranger to most of you because he's very present. He's committed. He also hates long introductions, so I'll apologize for this. But he's committed to working with our community and being out there, meeting students. And this makes sense because he's a scholar. Before he became a president or a leader of a center or a president of a community college and then a president of a senior college and then the chancellor, he was a scholar and a scholar and a teacher. And he studied something that I don't think it's surprising, but it's different. He studied he wrote on women's history, on Caribbean, Latino, and Puerto Rican history, and also the history of migration. And the great thing is that that history that he studied certainly helps in the work that he's doing now. The chancellor has also done a great job of making sure that the leadership teams that he's built at every level, and I can talk about every level because I've been with him since Ostos. He's made sure it's been a diverse group of people, a diverse in viewpoint, diverse in gender, diverse in ethnicity. It's a commitment of his, and it's a commitment that is important, and that really does animate all his decisions in some ways. And so it's a pleasure that we're going to get a chance to hear from him. He's been involved intimately. He's been involved intimately since the beginning of this conference, and just exciting to hear from him and to hear from all the other amazing folks that we're going to be able to hear from the rest of the day. And you'll hear more about it, but I saw students yesterday and they're very excited to come to Central tomorrow to get together, and then we'll be having our closing event also on Friday. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful leader, Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez.
Thank you, Glenda, for that wonderful introduction and for also being such a wonderful member of our senior team and of all the great organizing that went along to put the conference together. So thank you for all of that. And I want to give a very warm CUNY welcome to everyone on day one of the 2-day Career Compass for Women's Leaders Conference. I'm excited that the Women's Conference Week is already underway. Hopefully, some of you had the chance to volunteer yesterday for the CUNY Central Community Service Day in partnership with the United Way. Thanks to all the volunteers. I think this was an incredible addition to the program of the Career Compass Conference. I was able yesterday to join some colleagues at the Bowery Mission, preparing meals for many of the individuals that get that pantry food service from the Bowery, and it was a great way to share with colleagues and show the power of CUNY as a community anchored. And I want to thank everybody who volunteered in the different projects that we had in various locations of the city, and hopefully we can grow this more in the future. As many of you know, last year we unveiled the CUNY Lift in New York, our strategic roadmap for transforming the university into the most student-centric university by 2030. Part of that roadmap included a pledge to support all CUNY employees with world-class professional development and leadership training. This conference embodies this goal and so much more, directly going to the goals that we set to support an incredible staff as they continue their path professionally and personally of growth and of service. The Melinda Gates has written, "When you live women, you live humanity." And we know that women's rights are directly connected to the health and prosperity of society, and in our case, of our beloved New York City. This initiative has implications well beyond our university. Unfortunately, despite of the progress that we have made, there's still so much work to be done to achieve true gender parity in the workplace. McKinsey's 2023 report, entitled Women in the Workplace, looked at organizations employing more than 20 million people across the United States and Canada. One of the major barriers to women's advancement the report discussed was securing the first promotion to manager, a critical career milestone. And here's what the McKinsey report found. Last year, for every 100 men promoted to the from entry level to manager, only 87 women were promoted. Women of color lagged even further behind. Only 73 women of color were promoted to manager for every 100 men. And getting more specific, only 54 Black women were promoted for every 100 men. The effects of these disparities makes it impossible for women to catch up to their male counterparts, since at each level of leadership, there are fewer of them to promote. This is why it's important to focus on women at all stages of their careers, giving them the tools they need to be successful, such as programs like this conference initiative. So today we turn our attention to ways that we can be intentional in helping the women in our community, in our CUNY community, achieve their career goals. Or in some cases, help them to figure out exactly what those goals are and what the next steps to achieve those goals are. The speakers and the panelists that we have lined up in the next few days are ready to excite you, to inspire you, and address some of those questions for you. To date, keynote speaker Tiffany Taylor from the job search platform Handshake will talk about how her move from higher education to EdTech has given her the opportunity to expand her reach and help her even serve a larger number of students. We're so happy that she was able to join us, and I'm sure you're going to be in for a treat when you listen to her remarks. We also have a special breakout session today with Maya Kirkhope of Academic Search. She will help to demystify the academic search process for those looking to move into higher education roles like becoming a dean, a provost, or president. And for those of you who are still figuring out your next steps, Maya will be returning on Thursday to offer a breakout session on career mapping. The suggestions that she will have apply to all kinds of movement across the administrative career ladder. So I encourage you all to take full advantage of the Women's Conference Week and keep an open mind as you listen and engage. Even more important, make a plan to take what you've learned and put it into action in the year ahead. We have so many wonderful breakout sessions planned for the next few days. Topics include entrepreneurship, community engagement, workforce identity, and more. The only downside is that it will be tough to decide which ones to attend live, but they will also be recorded so you can go back and watch them when your time permits. As I wrap up today, I want to thank all of our speakers for being here and helping CUNY make good on its mission and help us to achieve one of the goals of our strategic roadmap. And now I am delighted to introduce the next presentation, the President's Fireside Chat, who will be moderated by Graciela Mochowski, the Dean of the CUNY's School of Journalism. And if you didn't read the New York Times yesterday, please go back to either the print version or the online, because it has a wonderful op-ed piece written by our Dean, Graciela. So I encourage everybody to look for that and get a sense of her vision as she leads our wonderful School of Journalism to even new heights. She will be joined by other colleagues, Government College President Larry Johnson, Jr., the College of Staten Island President Timothy Lynch, and Queens College President Frank Wu. I want to thank all of them also for participating in the conference. And you might be wondering why we have a panel just with male presidents. It is because we have many of our female presidents that make up half of all the presidents and deans in our system active in other parts of the conference. So they're going to be participating in other ways too. We also wanted in this panel to ask district presidents how they, as male presidents, elevate and promote their women leaders on their campus. So again, you're in for an incredible treat. My appreciation to all the organizers, particularly to Ms. Dolly Martinez. And now I'll turn it over to the panel and enjoy the day, the panel, and the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you so much. So hello, good morning. I'm Graciela Moszkowski, the Dean of the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. I am very happy and honored to be moderating this panel with my fellow presidents with my colleagues. So I'm going to ask them to turn on their cameras so everybody can see them. So we have, before we start, I wanted to say a few words about, to add to what the Chancellor was saying about the purpose of this conversation, this panel. So there's no, I think it's clear that Chancellor made a very strong case on why this conference is needed and why these spaces to talk about women empowerment are needed, because women are still in the job place and many other places at a disadvantage. I wanted to also to mention that this is why we're talking about women, and with a panel of male colleagues. But I wanted to acknowledge that there's that not everybody identifies as a man or a woman, that there's many other gender identities, and that a lot of people who identify as queer or transgender or in many other ways also have very, even sometimes worse, disadvantages in the workplace and everywhere else. So I hope this conversation will also resonate to them. And so before I start, another point I wanted to make is that because men are half of the world, and men have had more power than women historically, and there are still more men in positions of power in this world than women, it's very important for men to participate and to encourage and to support women so that we can raise higher and that we can be empowered. So there's no empowerment without men working for it too. So the way we see this panel is as a conversation where I hope my colleagues will tell stories and share anecdotes and share personal experiences on how males see this issue, how they have worked to help get things, help women to get empowered, and how that happens in our wonderful university. So I'm going to start asking Larry Johnson, the president of Gutman College, Community College, to tell us about the role of women in your life growing up. If you can tell us a little bit about what was the role of women in your community? How traditional was it? How do you remember it? And how that shaped your view of women?
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. Graciela, thank you so much, certainly to the Chancellor and Brenda Grace and Dolly Martinez for all the great work they do to provide an opportunity for the women that are in the City University of New York. So that is a really good question. You know, when I think about the women in my life, of course, we sometimes think about the role of our mother. And of course, my mother was critically important to that, but she passed away. So there had to be other women that would, stand in the gap, if you will, after she left me, I would say at 11 years old. So as I began to think about my maturation as a young man, my father was not really there. So it was important for me to find out the matriarch. So I would say the first woman in my life really became my godmother. I was a band student in 6th grade, and I latched on to the band parent. And she, followed me because her daughter was in band. And so we became really close. And she followed me from middle school to high school and then to college. And even now, she's still one of my closest, I would say, friends, mother figures, one who has provided advice. So from that lens, I've learned so much, not only about, responsibility, but one important conversation she had with me was the importance of credit. She said, you should always pay your bills every month. And that stuck with me because she said at some point in time, you'll need to buy a house, you'll need to buy a car, and you want to make sure that you're prepared to do those things. So she taught me life lessons about, growing up and really replacing that role of the father. And as I think about professionally, it was women who actually gave me the opportunities. My first job as a faculty member, humanities faculty member at Georgia Piedmont Technical College, was from a woman. She stood about maybe 5'7", but she had so much power, so much authority, and she commanded an audience. And that has been really important and really pivotal in my life. Most of the roles that I have been able to move into, from faculty member to dean, and then most recently at a former institution in Arizona, was again a powerful figure. Maria Harper Marinick. She was the chancellor of the Maricopa Community College system, and just such an intelligent, pivotal figure who was really helpful in helping me to navigate and to understand the nuances of higher education and nuances of working within unionized environments. And it was really helpful. So women have been very critical to my maturation, but also my professional development. And the work that we do at Gutman certainly is really supported by many of the women on my cabinet, who over half of the women on over half of my cabinet are women. So I'm surrounded by great talent, and I look forward to continuing to support them.
Thank you. We'll get to the school a little bit later. I wanted to start from the beginning with Tim too. So Tim Lynch is the president of the College of Staten Island. So how about you? What was growing up when you were a child and when you were, becoming a man? How were women present in your life, and what was their role?
Yeah, thank you, Graciela. And I want to echo Larry's comments about the contributions that Glenda, that the university provost, Betsy Hensel, and that others have made to the elevation of women within the City University of New York. They stand as real inspirations, I think, to our students, to our faculty, and to our colleagues in the administration. So I had a similar experience to that which was described by Larry, but I think the formative influence in my life as a young person was my older sister. My mother was unwell and often absent because of medical conditions, but my sister really took on the role of matriarch in our family. And one thing that I learned from my sister was she grew up in a family with myself and two other boys, so she was tough as nails because we didn't go easy on her, and she didn't go easy on us. And it was a real, I think, awakening when you looked at, I think, traditional gender roles in the 1970s. My sister was not playing with dolls. My sister was playing with basketballs and softballs, and she was a two-sport college athlete, and she, played rough with me and my brothers. And I'm better because of it. It really forced me to understand better, the capabilities of women in the workplace. My sister became an educator herself, and really inspired me to follow my dreams. A little bit later in my maturation, and this is probably going way off the script. I'm the father of two college-age daughters now. I'm a girl dad, and there's the axiom that strong women raise strong women, and my daughters are strong girls, and that's because of their mother, who's no longer married to me, but taught me really, I think, a lot about parenthood, a lot about capability. She herself is a PhD from the Graduate Center, so she's a Brooklyn College alum and a Graduate Center alum, and she's now a tenured full professor in biology in the Connecticut State University system. And although we're no longer married, we're still parents to our children, and she sets a fantastic example, not just for our kids, but for me as well. So, and then, looking at, some of the other leaders that I've learned from. When I was the provost at Queensborough, Diane Call had been the president there for many years and really taught me a lot about higher ed administration. And a little bit later on, Christine Mangino, one of our colleagues, has been a tremendous mentor and role model for me professionally. So I think at every stage of my career and at every stage of my life, I've been influenced by strong, powerful women who set me straight and tell me how it's going to be. And because of that, I think I'm much more effective as a leader and as an advocate for our female colleagues.
Thank you, Tim. Frank, who is the president of Queens College, and I'm eager to hear his story.
Sure. So I'll talk just very briefly about three women. I'll start with my mother, and I want to say something very positive, but with a caveat. I'm a lawyer by training, so everything has a disclaimer, and it is that my mother was so sacrificing. I wouldn't be where I am. My brothers wouldn't be where they are. I have two younger twin brothers. So my mother had to raise three boys. She's no longer with us. She passed about a decade ago. And that example of self-sacrifice is something that I try to bear in mind. But here's the caveat. I also recognize that she had a traditional role, and that's a gender stereotype, right? We should not expect that women in a professional setting be self-sacrificing any more than we should expect that anyone be self-sacrificing. So that to me is an example of how even as we respect women, that we have to be mindful that for almost all of us, whether we're male or female, whatever our ethnic background or faith, it's likely, except for professionals we work with who are a generation younger, it's highly likely that we grew up in circumstances where women had more or less traditional roles, gender roles. So the two other women I'll mention. Second is a teacher. You know, there's so many teachers that are so important. We train teachers. Our faculty are, of course, teachers in a higher education setting. And in high school, I had a teacher who encouraged me to write and to express myself, something that my parents did not encourage because that was not common where they had come from. It was not part of their background or part of what they did professionally in their careers. And that teacher was such an important influence. I still think of myself as a writer with a day job. I happen to be a college president, but I'm always writing, and I got to where I am by using words. So I owe that teacher a credit of just enormous debt, and I'm so grateful. The third person I'll mention briefly is the first boss that I had as an administrator, the provost at Wayne State University, where some 20 years ago I was the law school dean. And she was just so professional and competent and no nonsense, and someone who would not tolerate any form of bias or chauvinism. And it was apparent as soon as you started to work for her and work alongside her that this was someone who, given how senior she had risen up at a time when sexual harassment was entirely normal, when women would have just been told to their face that, you know, they were taking a seat that was meant for a man. And so on. She had gone to college in the 1960s and earned her doctorate in the 60s. So the example she set of professionalism is something that I continue to aspire to. So all along, it's so important to work alongside and for women and to come to realize the strengths and weaknesses that every individual has.
Thank you, Frank. Larry, you mentioned that your first job, you owe your first job to a woman. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So I was fresh out of undergrad, I would say, well, after grad school at Florida State University, and I began to apply for different positions. I knew I wanted to go into, community colleges in terms of, preparing disadvantaged, underserved, and underrepresented students. So I began to really think about, the role and how would I be able to really navigate that role to really assume those positions. So when I applied, and as I sat around the table, the vice president for academic affairs was a woman. The dean was a woman. I mean, it was amazing to see because I come from a small town where I did not see women in power. I mean, come from a small town of about maybe 20,000 people. The median income was about $25,000. So I didn't see that example often. So it was amazing to sit around this table interviewing to see such women present the information in such a clear and concise way as I had not really been had it as an example. So when I was hired for the job, I began to really think about how do I make an impact? And my mentor became the dean. And she really began to help me to understand, not only the nuances of the pedagogical practices as a faculty member, but she helped me to understand, how to really be empathetic. How to really be that servant leader and to really understand the importance of the work that I was taking on working at a community college. So she taught me, of course, and Frank talks about the self-sacrificing, but it was important for me to understand the nurturing aspect of the type of students that we were serving. So she really helped me to really grow and prosper in that role because I truly understood from her, the type of students, how to navigate difficulties as a classroom faculty member. I was 26 as a full-time faculty member, really trying to understand how do I now lead students who were some of them much, much older than me, right? So she was really helpful and just really helping me to indoctrinate into the culture of the organization and really understanding the nuances of higher ed and how I would be successful. And she was one of the first persons that really took me aside to chastise me about things I may have said in the classroom that were probably not as appropriate, but I was young and I was feisty, right? But she was so helpful and just really helping to lead and guide me. And that those lessons have proved to be very helpful because that helped me as I began to really matriculate from institution to institution and really understand the value of what it means to be a community college faculty member and a leader. And I attribute that to that first dean that I had that really helped to coach me along the way.
Thank you. That actually reminds me of how I became the dean, because I started working at the journalism school as the founding director of the bilingual program in 2016. And like a year into my tenure as the director of the program, Dean Sarah Bartlett, who's my predecessor, sat me down and said, "I'm going to plant this seed in your mind. I think you would be really good in the future when I retire. You would be a great dean." And I thought, is she out of her mind? Me, a dean? I mean, is she crazy? And then she really planted that seed, and it kind of, started to grow as this idea and this empowerment. And the fact that she saw that in me when I hadn't seen it, it really created, the space and really gave me the power to then apply to the job and fight for the job and get the job. So I relate to that story. So Frank or Tim, do you have a story you would like to share about how women or a particular woman help you get to where you are as a leader?
Yeah, thank you. Prior to joining CUNY, I had spent much of my career as an instructor and as an administrator at two other large public university systems, Cal State and SUNY. However, I was employed in a very unique campuses, the California Maritime Academy and SUNY Maritime in the Bronx. And those institutions are nothing like CUNY. They are disproportionately white, disproportionately male, disproportionately upper middle class. And I remember my introduction because I had originally taught at Kingsborough Community College. And then upon getting married, we moved to California, and I had a classroom of 36 engineering students taking a U.S. history survey course, and 34 of them were men and 35 of them were white. And I said, this is unlike any college classroom in America. I felt like I was addressing Congress as opposed to a freshman class. So it was a shock, and it didn't sit well with me or with some of the other instructors. So we started to think about how we could broaden our reach, broaden our impact. And we actually developed entire new curricula, new courses in race, class, and gender in the maritime world, for example, new majors that would appeal to individuals who maybe weren't inclined to become engineers. And this was done with the leadership, really, of the chairperson at the time, who was a woman and who, intentionally decided that we needed to move the needle here on gender equity amongst our students. So we created an entire new major, a major that was disproportionately female, it was more than 50% female students. We hired female faculty members strategically so that students would see themselves in their professors and see an opportunity to career advancement. And it really became a signature program, both in California and then when we replicated that, or I replicated that at SUNY Maritime. So I think having the perspective of CUNY and then going, which is so progressive on every front, and then seeing how, I don't want to say regressive, but how challenged other institutions might be, allows us to really, I think, amplify the work that we're doing at CUNY, take pride in the work that we're doing in CUNY, and advance the work that we're doing at CUNY elsewhere, taking models that work here and using them in other situations. Frank?
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I would like to credit my wife. She's been a colleague. We've done some work together. She's also was a longtime law professor, retired recently, and it's so important to have a partner who is an equal. And because she knows higher education as well, she's just offered wise counsel. And yeah, I don't mean in any way to disparage the single people who may be watching or who are colleagues, but I've just found that to be able to turn to someone, the leadership roles that we are privileged to occupy are lonely. There's really nobody you can talk to at your own institution because ultimately everybody reports up to you. And no matter how good or decent they are, and no matter how good or decent you try to be or thoughtful, everyone wants something from you. Maybe not today, but they will tomorrow, or you want something from them. And so just to be able to talk to someone, I think is important. And nobody understands you as well as somebody. As my wife points out, she's my biggest fan. She says that when she's being most critical. And it's important to have someone play that role in your life.
Thank you, Frank. So do you remember, if this is for the three of you, whomever wants to answer first, do you remember a moment in your lives where you understood that being a man was a privilege and that was not shared by women?
I realize that every day. My provost, who's female, gently mocks me. So I'm a runner. She's a runner. We sometimes run together. And one of the things that is immediately apparent is that the range of shoes that I can wear throughout the day is far wider than the range of shoes she can wear throughout the day. I can wear shoes that are comfortable, that are sensible, that are not painful. And because of expectations, and I've said to her, it's fine with me if you were running shoes all day long. But like many women in a professional setting, she has to carry a pair of shoes and change. And I see that and I realize, I don't do that. And there are men's dress sneakers that I can get away with where I'm wearing a pair right now. And that's a tiny little thing. But if you're a runner and you always have to carry a pair of shoes for the workplace, you realize, that's 2 pounds of weight you're carrying because of a gender bias and expectations that have nothing to do with performance. And I know that I am much more slovenly than she is, and I can get away with it. I can wear the same suit 2 days in a row. Nobody will notice because many of my suits look the same anyway. But if she wore the same outfit 2 days in a row, men and women would comment on it and not favorably. So it's immediately apparent in all these little details just of daily life.
Thank you. Tim or Larry?
Yeah, Frank hit on many of high points there. I think for me, I'm still within my first, I would say, 25 years of working. So it became apparent to me as I would engage with many of the leaders who I worked with. And it was apparent that a male president could do the very same thing. They can come in and they can command a room. There were certain practices, certain words, certain things that they can do. But I noticed recently, as I was serving with a leader, that leader would do some of the same things in terms of, leading with, passion, but leading with a sense of authority, but it was perceived different. And what I did not understand is that if the woman is competent, if the woman is really engaging and has worked hard to move throughout the roles and now has the intellectual acumen and competencies to do the job, why was there such this force and why is there such this mounting that has been really, put in front of her in terms of excelling in the role and was meeting and exceeding expectation, at least from my perspective and the community's perspective. And I think for me, I began to really understand the realities of, we say, and I say we, in terms of we want to promote more women in roles and we begin to see more women presidents. But then when you really think about it, and I look, 2 and 3 years down the road, those women are not in their jobs anymore. and you begin to hear all of these reasons as to why. But many of them, when you look back at what the work that they were doing, the engaging their community, raising the resources, they were doing all the same things that I would do, right? But it's then a community or a faction, a group who believes that, well, maybe this woman should not be in this role, or maybe that woman is stepping outside of the context of what Frank was mentioned earlier, a traditional role. And I think that to me has been really concerning in terms of being able to see that even in my network of community college women of color who I know who have been presidents, who I've supported and worked closely with, who are no longer in their position. So that's been startlingly disappointing.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, our jobs are difficult, and it's even more so for female administrators. I've had women athletic directors, for example, and I can't think of a more difficult job for a woman administrator than to be in charge of athletic programs that are traditionally dominated by male administrators, that have a disproportionate number of male coaches and male athletes. She was fantastic, but she really had a tough road because of just expectations as to who should be leading an athletics department. We as administrators supported her to the hilt, but she got a lot of blowback from some of the coaches who felt that they should be in that role, or that one of their associates ought to be in that role. And even at the College of Staten Island, we had a female vice president of administration, which is traditionally within higher education a male occupation. You're dealing with the building trades, you're dealing with contractors, you're dealing with construction contracts, and traditionally that's been a role assigned to men. And the work was doubly hard for these administrators because they had to battle not just the difficult nature of the job, but also perceptions as to what was appropriate, what was acceptable, and it just was very clear on a personal level as well. I'm aware of my privilege as a white man because I'm a historian and I go to museums all the time, and there's often added on exhibits. This is what we want to talk about. Oh, and here's the women's contribution over here on this side panel, or here's the contribution of people of color over here in this other not so well lit room. And it becomes jarring because I've been trained to look for these things, obviously, and I become much more aware of my own centricism here.
So given this awareness and self-awareness, tell us some ways in which you are supporting women in your campuses as leaders, because now you have a significant amount of power in your own campuses and in the university. And so how do you use it for the benefit of women empowerment? No order, whomever. Larry, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I began, and I actually, preempted this by mentioning that, on my cabinet at Gutman, most of my leadership consists of women. And, I think I want to say it was intentional, and that, as I began to really think about the construction of the cabinet, it was different prior to my arrival, but I really wanted to make sure that if we are truly an equity-centered institution, we have to present not only the table, but we have to invite key leaders to be at the table to help inform the decisions. And that was really my goal, to make sure that I had the best and the brightest and those who really care about not only the institution, but most importantly, the students. And many of the conversations that I have been able to have, have given me different perspectives, because I may approach it from a male lens in some perspective, and then many of the women are able to kind of give me that different context around, well, have you thought about this? Or maybe I would do it this way. So I think helping me to be more of an active listener to the women on my cabinet have really informed many of the processes that the college has implemented, and just really helping to round me out as a leader. Because one of the things I share with them is that I don't know everything, and that is the purpose of hiring great people around you so that they can really strengthen you as a leader. And with many of the women on my team, they each have a different role. One may be great in terms of policy and procedures. One may be great at understanding unions. One may be great at community engagement, but collectively, they really help round out really the body and help to inform the practices and how the institution will grow in its future.
Thank you. Frank?
So I think there's a way to balance the specific and the universal. What I mean by that is doing things that are mindful and conscious and deliberate and strategic to help women in particular also helps create a better workplace for everyone. And it's important not to lose sight of these two pieces. So I'll give you a concrete example. Women are disproportionately caretakers. That doesn't mean that everyone raising a child is female, doesn't mean that everyone caring for elderly parents is female, doesn't mean that someone who has kith and kin that they look after is female, but it is disproportionate and there is a burden, and we should recognize that. So when you do things that are more helpful, and during the pandemic, I think we all became, I hope, a little more mindful that people have lives outside of work that are important, and they will be better employees. They will function better in the workplace if they have a little leeway to take care of a child or a parent or whatever else is going on in their lives and with their responsibilities. So by trying to be better and understanding that there are gender inequities, when you address that, you actually help people who are male as well. And part of, I think, the argument that we need to make is, yes, this is the right thing to do. This is principled, it's moral, and it overcomes historic discrimination and the implicit prejudice we all carry around, the stuff that rattles around in the back of my head, even when I'm not aware of it. But it also is beneficial for the workplace as a whole. It's the business case for diversity is what it's sometimes called.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, absolutely agree with my colleagues here. The rising tide lifts all boats, right? So, working with female administrators is good, not just for the female administrators, it's good for the College of Staten Island and for CUNY. At CSI, we are about 52% female student population. And I think, that's a result of intentional outreach to local schools and local communities. And, the fact that we have a very diverse cabinet and ECP at CSI is a reflection of that intentionality, that strategy to elevate women, to help them succeed, to be strategic in the way in which we approach diversity. But it's not diversity for diversity's sake. As Frank said, it's diversity because this is best business practice. And you're bound to overlook good talent and improve the institution if you turn a blind eye to diversity initiatives.
You were mentioning before, Tim, I want to stay with you for a moment about going outside of CUNY, going to other institutions and noticing the difference. And
Absolutely.
That is the case, not just in academia. I mean, that has been the case in newsrooms, for example, for a long time. And there's been, a lot of women and men and people advocating for more gender diversity and other types of diversity within newsrooms. And so this is a world that is still very much, there's a lot of institutions in which you would see what you saw in that school. So why is CUNY different? And the three of you, particularly you and Frank, had been have many years at CUNY, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why is CUNY different in that sense. I remember my first meeting with when I was just appointed dean. I went to this meeting that we have monthly with the chancellor and the CUNY leadership, with all the deans and presidents. And this is this very, very large table. And I remember looking around the table and thinking, oh, wow, look, this looks like New York. There's so many women, so many people of color, so many different approaches. This is an amazing room. And not every room looks like that, even in New York City. So what can tell us a little bit more about that? Why is CUNY different, and how did that happen? Because it's never an accident.
No, I don't think this is accidental at all. I think this is intentional and strategic on the part of the chancellor and his team. Many years ago, I served as the interim president at Queensborough, and the composition of the room, both at the Board of Trustees meetings and at the Council of Presidents meetings, was considerably different. There weren't as many different perspectives and viewpoints. That's changed radically over the last 5 years, and it's changed for the better. And I don't think, I don't think that this is a hierarchical. I do think it's latitudinal. It's across the board. I think the chancellor is leading by example. He has never given a mandate to me, and I don't think to any other president that I'm aware of, that says, thou must diversify your cabinet. But it's clear from following best principles and best practices that this is in the best interest of the institution and the students whom we serve. So, I clearly think this is intentional on the part of the chancellor to recognize and reward talented people from diverse backgrounds to lead our institutions. And I'm happy to kind of pay that forward in our own operations. Larry?
So still a newbie to CUNY. I'll offer the context, having worked in a few places now. I like Graciela was really pleasantly surprised, but also very honored to be able to walk into my first COPS meeting and to really see just the wealth of diversity that sat around the room, and to really see the talent, and to see many of the women leaders who sat around the room who have truly embraced me as one of the newest community college presidents. And because that wasn't the context, I worked in Arizona, I also worked in Missouri, and the context was very different than what I see in CUNY. So it's been a welcome, I would say, been very welcomed in terms of being able to be with persons who you share similar values with, who really have a heart for the students, but who really lead by example. And I have to echo what Tim said. I think it's very with intentionality, to really see how the chancellor has hired colleagues who represent not only the communities, but really who represent New York City. I think that, again, that is a testament to the work that we have to do, and it aligns perfectly to many of the outcomes, because we talk about, having students to be represented and having faculty and staff and leadership at the helms that look like those students. And Tim made a very good point there. The only way you can really demonstrate that is you have to do it. You have to be really intentional when you get candidates. Oftentimes in other places I've worked, it was hard to do that. When you get a finalist, sometimes you have to go within the pool because that was the context. But CUNY has been so much different, and I really appreciate that experience.
I would say it's purpose, culture, and leadership. As to purpose, every institution in CUNY was founded for a reason. And, institutions of higher education, many of them once had a purpose, but they've lost it. They just want to rise in the rankings and be better than their rivals. Neither of those is a really great purpose, right? It's not compelling. CUNY is here to uplift individuals and families and communities. We continue to do that. So purpose, culture, because this isn't something that one person says. It's in this conference, and so much throughout CUNY is oriented toward that, from the messaging that we use when we visit Albany to day-to-day practices, and finally leadership, as has been mentioned. Phalo deserves just tremendous credit in this regard because he has been thoughtful about it and highly diplomatic. He is someone who embodies these values and has promoted them effectively and strategically Not everyone will do that. And we're living in a historic moment where there are many, many, many institutions in many, many, many jurisdictions that are headed explicitly the other way. They are against DEI. That is, they are publicly against. Their legislators, their governors have defunded it, and now they're investigating folks who have any interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. That it's become criminal some places. So it's just great to be in New York City and at CUNY.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I was going to go there next, and the national context and the way women are being marginalized again, and their bodies are being policed, and with everything that is happening around reproductive rights and the role of women, and just trying to push back for a more traditional role for women in so many places in this country, and how that has become a very contested political part of a very contested political agenda and presidential election year. So I like if you could expand a little bit more on that, each of you, about how does that reality manifest in your campuses, and of course how are you seeing that, and how is that, what are you seeing in your campuses, and how are you supporting women around these issues now? Even, we're in New York, where, we still have access to many of these things, but, this is a reality that's not going away. It's getting really, polarizing and difficult for women around the country. Whomever wants to answer. Larry.
Thank you, Graciela. I'll approach it as this. So one of the I would say the blessings and the good fortunes that I have is that, my cabinet, we're not afraid to have the difficult conversations about, topics that impact, I would say, our campus, but impact various communities. And which is why we truly are, when we say we're equity centered and equity minded, we focus on the difficult topics. And we also do that from the perspective of how do we engage our students. And I think that's important when difficult topics, such as what you mentioned, presidential election, reproductive rights. One of my areas of interest is always what are our students thinking, and how can we engage them around not only, yes, the rah rah rah, yes, we want them to be actively involved, but helping them understand why. What is the context, the national context, as to why these conversations are happening, who are leading these conversations, and what is their role within the conversation, because we want them to lead as civic-minded individuals. And again, Frank mentioned this before, if you empower one, you empower all. So having these rich conversations at the cabinet level, and then really empowering our leaders to have those conversations with students on many of these topics, I think will lift everyone, because as they're voting from a perspective of really understanding the issues and understanding how it applies to maybe their aunt, how it applies to their sister, and et cetera. So I think for me, it's truly about not being afraid. And that's one of the things I've loved about CUNY. There's some topics that I could not have had in different states that I've worked at. But being here, there are topics that we embrace openly. And I've been very surprised, but I've also been very fortunate to say, okay, wow, this is a different time and a different place in New York City, of course, that opportunity. So with each of those topics, I think that really, yes, having the voice of understanding the context about women and how they're impacted, how can we educate the students, our female students? We have a program called Women of Grit, and we make sure that there are different resources that are made available to them. But again, we also have those conversations within the context of why these things are happening, who's leading that conversation, and how can we really help our students to understand the contextual framework so that they are empowered and they're not just listening to one lens.
Right. Thank you.
I agree, Larry. And it's not just what's happening in the classroom on a college campus that's important. So much of the learning process happens through different mechanisms. So at the College of Staten Island, we have a very active women's center, the Bertha Harris Women's Center, that hosts guest speakers and informational activities. Yesterday, they were engaged in activities to raise awareness about and support for women in transitional housing, victims of domestic and gender-based violence. So we're teaching students about civic engagement, civic activism, not just in the confines of a traditional academic curriculum, but in terms of being good members of the community. On Friday, CSI will be hosting CUNY-wide LGBTQIA plus conference. And there's going to be panels on the trans experience. And that's just another example of how CUNY is having the courage to engage with topics that I think other institutions on a national level would run away from and shy away from. And here CUNY embraces and uplifts folks from all different backgrounds. And it's really affirming to be a part of, to see students engaged about these activities in dialogue, even when they're in disagreement. It seems to be courteous and well-informed. So, this is the mission of higher education in general, but as Frank had mentioned earlier, it is in particular the mission of public higher education, and especially the mission of the City University of New York.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go in a slightly different direction with this prompt, which is to say, part of what I see higher education as doing as part of the purpose is also exposing people in the classroom and beyond to other cultures and other communities, other traditions that they wouldn't at home experience at all, and that in their household there might be hostility to, while always being respectful of where people are coming from, literally and figuratively. And there's something very specific I want to say, and I'll focus on a community that people would identify me with, whether or not I would identify with it or not, which is Asian immigrant households. So I already mentioned my mother had a fairly traditional female role. I'm 57. I was born in 1967. And so this is in the 1970s in the Midwest in the United States. And one of the things that I hope our students see who are coming from similar backgrounds, where the mother stays at home, or if the mother works, is still absolutely the primary caretaker, and the father is either not involved, maybe absent. What I hope they'll also see, and in some instances, there may be arranged marriages, there may be domestic violence. Again, I don't want to stereotype, but I know that this is an issue for some of our students. I hope that they will be exposed to something different as well, and that they see that a woman does not have to defer to her husband, that there is a purpose in life outside the home for those who wish to pursue it, that you don't have to walk behind men or wait to be spoken to, because I know for some number of our students, again, I don't want to generalize, but for some of them, they're coming from backgrounds where that is still the expectation. And I also don't want to just tick off the parents and grandparents of the students who I'm happy to have. So this is something that they will just see when they're on our campus, and that we could help expose them to through female leaders and role models. And for so many of them, even though it's not part of the formal curriculum, that part of higher education, that is crucial to their development.
So thank you for that. So students, you all mentioned your students and how their views and their experiences actually, they are our mission. They are the reason why we do everything we do. So how have, there's been a cultural change around gender and around the role of women, of course, during our lifetimes, and particularly in the past few years. How do your students change your view, have changed your view on gender identity, on how young people, young women want to be empowered? How Can you think of an example or of a moment in which the students kind of taught you something about that? I'll start with a conversation we had right before the pandemic at the journalism school, where a group of students asked to give a presentation during the faculty meeting around pronouns. And so they saw that many professors were still struggling with non-binary and non-gender and non-binary pronouns, and a lot of our students, I think 2% by then, didn't identify as she or he. They wanted to, be identified as them in many cases, and professors kept messing up, and they just couldn't. It was really hard. They saw it was really hard for them to get some professors to take this seriously. And so they offer an amazing presentation where they explained why this was so important and so hurtful when people misgender them and use the wrong pronouns. And that was that, really. I mean, the school did a lot of work around that. Then those students, another group of students, ask for non-gender bathrooms. So we're doing a big renovation this summer to add non-gender bathrooms that the school didn't have. And we are better because of those students, because they pushed us to be better. So do you have examples like that you would like to share?
Students will keep us honest. Students are they will not hesitate to call out what they see as performative, right? Meaning it's insincere. A little part of me does want to push back and say, well, every part of my job is performative, right? But students will lead the way for us on so much of this.
Thank you, Frank.
Graciela, I think that is that is a great question. So, I will say I'll age myself. So I grew up in the 80s. I'm a millennial, right? And when we heard about millennials, we thought, oh my God, who is this group of population? But now, this next generation, we're really saying, wow, they are challenging gender norms. They're challenging all that we know. So when I served as president of Phoenix College, there was a student who dressed a male-born student who dressed in heels and a dress. And at the time, I had a football team. We were preparing to dissolve the team. So I had a football team and many athletic programs. And I became aware that the football team and the basketball team, male sports, they were, taunting this particular student. But it was an educational lesson for me because I went to the safe zone training, which many of my student affairs leadership had gone through. And we really sat down with our students to begin to help them to understand, all of the, I would say the binaries. And then I began to look at the flags because I only knew about one flag. There was the flag that we all see is the pride flag, but then I began to see the pink and that represented the trans community. And then I began to see eight, 9, 10 other different iterations because persons began to really the sexuality began to really evolve. So that was an example for me. I had never had an encounter where we actually had a student on campus who was dressing in the preferred identity that they wanted to be. The student wanted to be referred to as a she and her, and I respected that, but it gave me an opportunity to really understand how do we now, as we begin to, prepare to be a student-ready college across academia, how do we really prepare the faculty, the staff, and the other student bodies to understand the types of orientations that students bring with them, but the end of that, individualities that will strengthen the community and really help to understand who these students are, what their stories are, and how can that really enrich the culture of the college. And that was a very, I would say, very uncomfortable conversation for some because they had not seen this. We're talking about Arizona here, right? And I won't talk about the context of this politics, but that was rare on the campus. But it was a lesson, an educational lesson for our students, and it is one that I think that campus was better. And now that we've evolved now and we're beginning to see all of these binaries, I am really happy that I had that moment because it informs much of the work that is happening even here on the campus where we have all types of gender expressions and all throughout New York City.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Did we lose
yeah.
Sorry, did we lose Frank? I don't see him on
He's up
stage.
he's up top now.
Okay.
It looks like,
I hope
you
the
know,
audience can see him.
so when Frank says our students will keep us honest, so will your teenage daughters, and I've got two of them, and one thing that we learn is they our students and our children can often be the most profound teachers, right? And they'll call us out on misstatements, and they'll let you know when you're running afoul of whatever norms they might have established for themselves. So, earlier in this fireside chat, Larry used the phrase active listeners. And I think that's really what we need to be. We need to be active listeners and active learners. And because these times are challenging, but they're also changing. And we need to be engaged in the national conversation about how we can best support all of our students. Because when we support one of our students, we're supporting all of our students. Again, echoing what Frank had offered earlier about a best business practice for promoting diversity. So remaining engaged in the national conversations, being aware of challenges to what's happening on college campuses, I think is critically important for us as leaders. And it's especially important for us as leaders of public institutions in New York City. The students whom we serve are, the best exemplars of everything that we try to do on a daily basis. And we need to listen to them if we want to be effective advocates for them with or if we want to be servant leaders, which is really, I think, what we hold ourselves up to be.
Thank you. So we have just a few minutes, and I wanted to ask a final question, which is, Frank remind me the other day that CUNY has had one female president and one interim female president. And but we were just talking about how our current chancellor, and how the current chancellor has really empowered women and has changed the demographics and the gender composition of the leadership in the university. So sometimes and oftentimes it's men who can empower more women and bring this change about. So as men leaders, how do you do that? What is your advice for other men leaders in academia, particularly, on how to do this, how to empower women, how to change a culture in which women are not empowered, and how to bring about this type of change?
You can't just announce it. There was a study about 6 months ago that showed a gender gap. There are many psychological and other social science studies that show this. This one, they interviewed people, just regular people. If the pilot of your airplane and the co-pilot were unconscious, do you think you could land the airplane if the control tower gave you guidance? And something like 80% of men said, "Oh, sure, I could land a commercial airplane, no problem." And only 50% of women, or 40% were so egotistical as to think that. So there's this huge gender gap. But just to point out the gap, you can't just point it out, because you also shouldn't assume that every woman or every man has that particular belief that the majority of them has. But there's something going on here, right? There's something that has to do with culture and how we've raised people and about expectations that's producing this effect. So to unwind this is incredibly hard because this is all around us. It's in everything we do and how we've structured society. So, but the initial step is to say, all right, there's this phenomena, there's something unequal here. What do we do about it now?
Thank you.
And just to add on to that, creating the conditions for success. So if we know that if when we're doing succession planning, we should create the leadership institutes. We should create, the programming that will give women the opportunity to be able to sit in those seats so that they can see themselves. So I think that's critically important. And also offering resources such as leadership institutes, be they in CUNY, be they statewide, nationally, so that they can have those opportunities. So I think that we have to do that. But as we're sitting having our one-on-one meetings with our senior leadership team members, and many of them who may be women, we have to present. Have you heard about this conference? This is a great way. Have you identify women mentors and connecting them with women mentors who can also help them as well? So I think we have to create the conditions for future women's female success.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, absolutely, Larry. Professional development is key. Provide opportunities for individuals to empower themselves so that they can take on these leadership roles. And my advice to other kind of male leaders, particularly within higher education, would be to do just that, to invest in your people, to provide opportunities for professional and career development. Because one piece of advice that I've once received, and which I often say, is hire good people and stay out of their way. Give them the resources to do the job, and let them make you look good. And boy, did the female leaders at my institution and across CUNY make us look good.
Thank you. On that note, we're going to close this conversation. Thank you so much for all your very thoughtful contributions. I'm very honored and privileged to be your colleague.
Oh, thank you, Graciela.
Rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Good morning. Thank you so much for such a wonderful fireside chat. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Denise Patrick, and it's my pleasure to be back here for year 5 of our women's conference. And I just want to say that I think that conversation was certainly definitely awe-inspiring and also quite informative. So overall, thank you to Dean Graciela Mashowski for moderating the fireside chat with Presidents Lynch, Johnson, and Wu. And thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insights to some intriguing questions. As I said, I'm Denise Patrick. I'm Dr. Denise Patrick, and I am excited to be here. And I just want to welcome all of you to the next portion of this conference. So for wherever you are, your offices, your homes, wherever you find yourselves today, sit back and get ready for our keynote speaker. It's truly inspiring and amazing how we can connect and learn from each other virtually. And that's the beauty of this digital age. And it really sets the stage for what we're going to dive into on day 1 today of our conference. So now I'm thrilled to introduce someone who's not just talked the talk, as I say in my New York dialect, who's not just talked the talk, but has walked the walk when it comes from making bold career moves. Tiffany Taylor is going to be here with us, and she is up on the screen. If you can see her, she is going to be our keynote speaker, and her story is nothing short of inspiring. Starting in the world of higher education, Tiffany made a leap that many dream of, but few dare to take. She ventured into the tech industry, specifically ed tech industry, proving that transitions can lead to incredible growth and opportunities. What makes Tiffany's journey so relevant for us, especially in this virtual setting, is her embodiment of the pivot. It's about embracing change, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Tiffany will show us that our backgrounds in academia can indeed be our superpowers in any field, including tech. As Tiffany shares her insights today, let's think about our own potential pivots. How can we use our skills, our experiences, and our voices in new and impactful ways? Tiffany's path from higher education to tech isn't just a career change. It's a message to all of us about the power of believing in your value and the impact you can make. Her insights today are bound to make us think differently about our careers, the changes we face, and how we can pivot with confidence and with grace, just as she did. So as we kick off this session, let's lean in, let's listen closely, and let's get ready to be inspired. It's a privilege and it is an honor to welcome a real trailblazer, a mentor, and someone who's showing us the way forward. please give a virtual round of applause for Tiffany Taylor of Handshake.
Dr. Denise, I don't know how I'm going to live up to that. I'm about to give you an applause for this intro. I'm like profusely sweating now. There's no way that I can live up to that kind of introduction. But it is my honor. I am ridiculously grateful. Before I even get into my slides and my introduction, what you all need to know is that I still don't consider myself a woman from tech. The years I've spent in higher ed have far outweighed my time in tech. And so I feel like I'm with my people. You are my people. You have built me into the career human that I am. And so I'm so grateful for that. I think our presenters, including myself, will get a lot of accolades today. I spent a lot of my career being the folks behind the scenes, planning everything from website, registration, serving on this, that, and the third conference, because we know that's what kind of keeps our higher ed professional development flowing. I know we don't have a chat, but if you all are filling out feedback after you heard Dr. Denise Patrick talk about this being the 5th year, there are a lot of incredible humans that do not get paid to stand up this beautiful, beautiful session. Gratitude is my love language. So I just wanted to start off by saying, please, regardless of what you leave today with, be sure to thank the folks that made today possible. I am just grateful to be a small part of that today. So thank you. Give me a quick moment. I want to share my screen so that we can walk through and tend to all our various ways of learning. I am Tiffany Taylor. I used to teach public speaking classes. I've already ruined all the rules of the things to do by not starting out by introducing myself. I've had 15 plus years in higher ed. As you heard Dr. Patrick mentioned, I pivoted into tech at a time that many would have considered late in their career. I currently supervise about 33 individual contributors and managers. And really, I work at software. I never knew that that's what I would have done. And learning, utilizing, informing customers on the development of this tool. And I now fully work remote. This is my office, but I spend a lot of time traveling often to our customers. I am much better in person. I am an extrovert by nature. And so the ability to still serve my higher ed partners on the ground is pretty massive. For those of you who don't know Handshake, it's an early talent recruitment platform that works with our employers, education partners in connecting students to career opportunities. And I could never conceive of being at a place that really brings together the very realm of what I built my career with and fell in love with. When I was speaking with the folks who organize, those incredible magicians on the back end that have been organizing your event, I really spoke about the 3 main areas that you're focused on, that your theme for this year: career advancement, challenges and opportunities in leadership, and community engagement. I hope the various stories I share with you about my own career journey touch on each of those at least a bit along the way. And certainly my favorite part, my conversation with Dr. Denise Patrick after this. I am often quick to remind folks, all I can do is share my journey and hope that the path for you is much easier than it was for me. I didn't have someone in my network to share this rather scary, risky, and all the rejection that happens along the path. And so I'm often very open to sharing the good, the bad, the in-between. I don't sugarcoat. I'm a Caribbean woman. We're not known for that. And so know that the things that I'm sharing are just my own path. It is my truth. And I hope that that can serve as a guide, while of course inextricably hoping that the path for you is significantly easier, because now it's a much different landscape. Well, why did I consider the career pivot, as you heard so beautifully laid out in the introduction? Of course, I was scared out of my mind. The imposter syndrome was only the beginning. And so we hear a lot of folks talk about, well, there's never one moment where this person decided to do this thing or take the leap of faith. I did have a one moment. Many of you, I'm not sure, maybe in your region what it's called, but at the district that I was a part of in California at the time, we had our SALT leadership, right? It's a student affair leadership team, a huge meeting that would, oh, I'm so sorry. That's my dog. I am so sorry. I am alone this week. My partner is also traveling and the dogs went haywire. I am here. So I was at our student affairs leadership meeting and I was at the highest point of my career. I had the largest title I had. I was on track to become a president. I oversaw the largest budget I could. And I really was on the path that I had spent so many years, boys, that I had spent so many years paving. And at the risk of sounding pompous, I was on track to be a university president. If I could see your faces, I'm sure you'd be nodding. Many of us as women and women of color, we know we have to do more and better and faster. And I wanted to make sure that there was going to be no reason to tell me no. So I spent my career building the repertoire that I thought it would take to serve as a university president. So name the university type, I had worked at it. It was small, private, large, liberal arts. It was community college. I was building the resume so that when I applied for that president role, there would be no reason, or I would try to minimize those reasons. Here I was sitting in this room with incredible leadership. I found myself at a district with 3 presidents of color, women, and I said, wow, this is mobility. Our chancellor was an immigrant. Oh, wow, I could not have been at a better place. Somewhere along the meeting, we're talking and we're at minute 50. And I realize we have not mentioned students. And I have this very visceral experience of thinking, wait, am I now putting up more of the red tape that I spent my entire career taking down? I can't answer that question for anyone else here. I could only answer it for me. And it really hit me. I thought that I had made more of an impact as a young director overseeing multiple buildings. I've cried at more graduations than the law would allow. I have helped students off of suspension. I've worked with formerly incarcerated youth, walked them across those graduation stages. And here I was in what I thought was my most impactful role. And I did not think I was doing that. Well, I couldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I had now several degrees. I had published, I've advocated for and written much of the policies that govern our education system in California. I have picketed in Sacramento. And I really had to think about where could passion meet career? That is not a new question. Our career services offices have been asking folks that for a millennia. And here I was revisiting that in my insert late age here. And what I had to think about was, well, where could I still be useful? Where could my knowledge, the years of experience, the connections that I had made, and yet it still be different? Okay, maybe it wasn't the path to a president's role. Maybe there was another aspect of higher ed. I didn't know, but I started to ask those questions. I also then had to ask, what did happiness and financial security look like? Another very personal question. We are taught that we don't talk about finances, particularly women, that we are told someone else can manage that or someone else can, that is not me. And so I really had to now have a conversation with my partner and really think about, okay, what is it that I am willing to do? What is the lowest amount that we can take to still sustain the life? I couldn't then cripple both of our lives because I was having an aha moment. And those are the things that they sound hard, they sound rigid. We're told not to talk about them. We're told not to talk about them openly. But I think that these are the questions that help you to get through that fear, that anxiety. Now, let me be clear, you might not like what the answer is out on the other side, but you have to go through that rigor and be very honest with yourself about what some of those answers might be. What I think we don't talk about is this dirty little word, this R word, rejection. I cannot speak enough about it. In fact, my dad would say how it's in fact a larger part of the equation. He's like, mathematically, you're likely to be rejected from a job more than get it, right? And we have to be really comfortable with it. I will say, I think it's equal parts of the journey. And so warming up to what you need to be resilient, what you need to bounce back. I'm not telling you that I was happy-go-lucky after every rejection. What I can tell you is that I applied to 19 jobs, was rejected from 18, and handshake is where I landed. Let that marinate for a while. That was hard. And in fact, where I really struggled was that I would ask for feedback through the process, and folks weren't willing to give it to me. In fact, I would get emails that weren't responded to, or folks just say, sorry, we don't do that. And so here I was in the void of my own self, with no mentors, no conference like this of others to speak to. I did not have a network on LinkedIn that was connected to ed tech, which, by the way, wasn't even a term when I was job searching. And so I felt really alone. Yes, I of course consulted the impeccable network that I had built in higher ed, and those folks helped to remind me, you are good enough. All right, let's iterate. They helped me with some of the research. They helped with some of that bounce back. But a lot of that I had to do alone, and I had to be willing. I am so sorry, folks, boys. This was not the plan. That I had to be willing to reiterate, even if it meant going against how I knew showing up was important. Because I would show up one way and then decide, all right, what could I change? What could I change for the next interview? And maybe I missed the mark, maybe I didn't. And that became a little tough. We're so used to, a lot of times folks will ask me for the informational interview and they'll say, what are the 3 things I need to know? What are the 5 things? And I'm like, there's no quick list, folks. There's no quick list, which probably makes me a horrible keynote, because you want your quick takeaways. My quick takeaways are become comfortable with rejection. That is kind of it. And just know that banking on yourself, believing in your skill set, iterating on your skill set is what gets you over the line. I was unemployed for a whole year. That was hard. That goes back to what I said on the previous question about I really had to think about my own finances and what I would be capable of doing. Let me be clear. I knew that at the end of the year, I didn't burn any bridges. Higher ed is an incredibly warm and welcoming community. And I knew that I would be able to go back to several of my university presidents and say, hey, what do you have open? What can I work with? I just knew maybe it wasn't going to be that path. And so I will say I am lucky in that way. I knew I don't want to call it a safety net. I certainly would still have had to apply, but I had spent years building an incredible relationship base at numerous universities that I wanted to revisit. So when I had said becoming okay with the answers to the questions, a part of that was me becoming okay with that. If I had taken this year exploring, was I going to be okay if I didn't get hired? Was that going to feel like failure? I said no. I said, if I put a year into this thing, iterating, trying, and going for it, and it didn't pan out, then it didn't pan out. I was going to go back to higher ed, but I had thought about maybe doing it in a different way. Maybe I'd go to orientation. Maybe I'd do orientation. I love working with that community. Maybe I'd work with advancement. Maybe I'd find universities with programs that work with at-risk youth. So I had already redefined what I knew the next would be. And so I had to be okay with that. But you realize accepting that meant accepting that I might not get accepted in this tech foray that I had gone into. I'd mentioned before the lack of feedback and needing to iterate was hard and confusing to navigate. I hope for you, as I had started off, that there are more folks that you all can ask for assistance and feedback loop than I had, but at the time I did not. And so needing to, it's changing a light bulb in the dark, right? Did it move? What do you need to do? and I didn't have a network. No one who was at Handshake when I started, I was connected to. My entire network were various higher ed folks, but no one in that tech space. And so my resources in how to even get my foot in the door felt rather limited. The obstacles I encountered along the way. So fine, a year and 18 rejections later, and I end up at Handshake. Wow, the learning curve was huge. I'm not going to further date myself, but let me be clear. Folks had degrees in things that were not degrees when I was in college. I thought I was fast. If you ask any of the provosts I reported to, they would say, yes, you give Tiffany something and she will turn that out before end of day meeting and surpassing deadlines. This team was faster. This team, I thought my partner, his analogy was, I thought your volume was full. And then you showed up at Handshake and somehow there was more on that knob to go. Resources were everywhere. In my higher ed path, I was the one always creating, now I'm going to date myself, binders of manuals and books and SOPs, but I was the one always creating the resources. Here, there are so many already built in or they're accessing from other companies, and I had to become speedy in my ability to review, self-solve, and ask thoughtful questions. How many times have you gone to a meeting and no one has read the pre-read? No one has read the information that you gave before the meeting. Here, we are held accountable to that. And so that was just, those are these, they sound small, but these very tactical things that I had to become, it was, and when I say it, become aware of, maybe 3 hours into the job on the first day, I become acutely aware of how much that I needed to learn, relearn, unlearn some bad habits and truly keep up. It meant that it wasn't about just age experience. It was we were showing up. So I had so much to learn from, yes, albeit my younger counterparts, but they had experiences with tools that I hadn't even heard of, efficiency tools that helped us move faster. So then I could even build some of those resources. And so if I were to go back to my list, these 3 things, I would say this was true on day 1. And several positions later, I now lead that entire team, and these are still true. Every time I get promoted into a new role, every time we create a new vertical, every time we get into a new project, my learning curve starts again. I know I need to work equally fast. The economy impacts how we do our work. And so now we need to move in faster. My ability to self-solve and not tax another team is very important, utilizing what has already been out there. And these have been incredible constants that I hope if my own leadership were here would say these are absolutely things that I've embraced that have helped me move at the pace that I have. Things I wish I knew. Not having a previous existing network meant I had few people to seek guidance from. So for my folks who I hope you've realized, I've started a bit from the philosophical, here are the things I've brought to the table, being okay with rejection, how I navigated the day-to-day and the things that I learned along the way, or rather the obstacles. If you needed your tangible takeaways, I also wanted to tell folks, I did not, that aha moment I told you in higher ed, the light didn't go off and I was like, oh, let me go running to tech. In fact, it wasn't, I always say, run toward, not from. Run toward, not from. You will not be successful if we're running from something. I wanted to feel purposeful. Hear the words I mentioned to you before. I thought I was putting up the red tape that I had built my career on removing. So I didn't leave that meeting thinking, oh, well, let me go to tech and make things better. I will go back to that slide. It said I wanted to know where my skills could be useful. So essentially, I was looking for higher ed adjacent. Again, ed tech wasn't the word being thrown around. I was looking for, who are vendors that work with our universities. Some of you might know Sodexo. I was like, oh, Dining Commons, great. I could help build relationships with schools that they don't have programming with. I love maybe working with healthy nutrition programs. So I want you to know I did not come with this narrow vision of going into tech. I wanted to use my higher education skill set, my intimate knowledge of the student community to figure out what that next would be. Specifically for coming into tech, but I do think these are pretty applicable to whatever the pivot that you make. The tech stack and the tech skills. So knowing what's being used would have enabled me to seek certifications that would have helped me move faster. So I think this would have happened every time I have an informational interview with someone, I can wax poetic on the 32 tools we use. And most of these companies provide a free certification, even a level 1, for you to be competent in utilizing those tools. That 1 year of unemployment, I wish I had spent some of that time exploring what some of those tools were and even knowing what those were. So even if you aren't going into tech, whatever that industry is that you want to pivot on, bringing me to my second point here, learning about that industry can help you access, well, what are the skills that this foray might need that I don't have now? I wish I had learned more about the industry. Like I said, I knew nothing about SaaS or ed tech and should have read and listened to many of the resources available. There are podcasts upon podcasts upon podcasts that while I was there crying at many a coffee shop in Alameda while I was applying, I was working out, I could have been just digesting as much information about this industry because that's just going to help. It would have, on the previous slide, I spoke about pace. It would have helped me understand a lot of what I was getting into before. I love this as a circling around, since Dr. Denise Patrick mentioned it in the intro. The ability to pivot is a critical strength. I'm not just talking about the pivot I made from one career to another. Specifically in tech, we pivoted this week. We were rolling out something and we had to stop on Friday, and now we have a new initiative on Monday. It wasn't something that I remember having to do as intimately in higher ed. In fact, I think there's a program I created at San Jose State now 11 years ago that they're still doing. That's not bad, good, or neutral. It just is. I have found that in my career, being able to you can be very passionate about something last week and just understand that sometimes because of the economy or budgets, or there's just a general shift because insert whatever initiative needs to be moved in a different direction. An ability to let that go immediately and pour everything into this new thing is something I experience regularly. And that ability to iterate has been very critical in my role. What keeps me going and engaged after going through this path? I have an incredibly collaborative team. Everyone is willing to help. This was something I had also found in my previous career. Some of you might know I used to work in residence life. And, obviously someone had to work on Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, all of those things. And my hand would always go up, or who needed to do this extra thing on this weekend. And that became very lonely. It was saddening. Of course, the folks of us who were always doing that, those are now my closest colleagues, right? Many of us were the ones planning the conferences. And on my team, everyone is willing to help. Everyone is open to answering questions. And it's a safe place to ask questions. That co-working and cross-functional work is actually a metric of how we are reviewed annually. It's on everyone's review straight up to our leadership team. And so the fact that it is so ingrained, that cross-functional work is a critical part of how it is explained for us to be successful is very powerful to me. I have a supportive leadership bench. They're accessible with everything from when I am on site at our headquarters, they're sitting right alongside us. In fact, if you had never known any of us, if you walked in, I doubt you'd be able to distinguish our co-founder from our chief bench from my ICs. And there's something very incredible about that. You are welcomed to bring your whole human to work. I think everyone on my team knows about these terrible dogs that now you all know about, and the families. We have Cute Kid Tuesday, and folks are posting pictures of their families, and all that to say that I am not just one thing. I am a multifaceted human that is allowed to bring that multifaceted person to work. Internal mobility. I have moved through various positions with my team, and there's several examples. In fact, I freshly got to promote someone yesterday, which has to be one of the best parts of any manager's job, and getting to not just promote her, but move her to another team in working in an aspect of work that she never thought that she would have fallen in love with, but through her work here wanted that. And I feel like here, where I have found myself, we try to continue to hone and support internal mobility. And so through all of those things and that journey, these are the things that have kept me there and hopefully will keep me there for a bit more time. Before I go into my time with Dr. Denise Patrick, if there is anything that you take away from this, I was one of those humans. I think many of us fell into lessons in chemistry, whether you read it or watch it. And if you haven't, I advise you to do one or both. Whenever you feel afraid, remember courage is the root of change, and change is what we are chemically designed to do. And that is it for me until I welcome back my phenomenal Dr. Denise Patrick.
Yay! Brava. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was, man, I took so many notes. I'm glad I was muted because I'm clicking away like crazy.
Were one of the notes, don't get dogs? I hope that was one of them.
No, actually, one of the notes I have mentally is, the shift and the pivoting that we have had to do in our virtual world is to, and I think one of the presidents mentioned it earlier in the fireside chat is, we all have lives and they don't always fit in these neat little packages, right? So yay for the pups and yay for making you more real, right? Because I'm sure all of us can identify with something that's going on in our backgrounds. I do want to start actually where you ended with this quote. I just think it's a great place to begin, and then we'll move into some other things. I love that quote. That's where I was trying to click pretty quickly. Whenever you feel afraid, remember courage is the root of change. And that change is what we are chemically designed to do. As you look back through your process of going from this burgeoning career in higher education and then trying to pivot your way out of it, I guess I'll ask it this way. What were one or two things that you did to inspire from within your own courage to make the change?
I love this because it feels appropriate when we talk about it being Women's History Month. My mom, I thought a lot about her on that journey. And she wasn't someone I could ask questions, not because she's no longer with us, but her path was very different. She was a food and beverage director at the hotels, but what she did was command a team of predominantly a male-dominated industry. And I thought she had no network. Her parents weren't around. There was no path before her. And it wasn't about just her leadership. She did it with an immense amount of care. I mean, Dr. Patrick, I mean, I don't want to sound morbid, but like at her funeral, the family side was very small. Her side, I am talking falling out of every hotel she had worked at. They're called sidemen. People used to load the truck. She would go to them and say, you don't want this to be just your life. And she would teach them to read so they could get their license, so they could earn more money to drive the truck. And I was like, this woman who was so stern, so strict, led with more empathy than many of us could ever hold. And I thought, how did she do her job with little to no guidance? Well, she relied on people. She looked for the goodness in people and surrounded herself with people. Her job was very singular, but she knew that she could command teams to do things at the 11th hour. After a hurricane, when a hotel needed water, she could call those same sidemen and say, hey, I know it's 2:00 in the morning. I need you to leave your family because we have guests visiting the country and we need to bring them water. And I often tell folks when I'm giving them advice about management, and I say, when you are good to people, they will give you the 25th hour and no questions asked. And so I thought about when I was like, she did that and had no help. There was no LinkedIn, there was no network, there was no, she went for what she knows. She knows goodness. She knows how to be good to people. And so a part of that was me reaching out to folks who maybe I hadn't connected with before and said, hey, I just got this rejection. I don't know anything about this. Can you give me any guidance? I did ask the place. I only want 5 minutes of your time. And just, and even that came with some no's, but I had to bank on the goodness of people. And that's how I know I can build relationships. I know that that could have an outcome, but I thought about her a lot in that process.
That's beautiful. And I think what you just shared really speaks to a different way that we may want to think about how we get our courage. I think, particularly for women, we tend to think we have to do it. I should speak for myself. I don't want to speak for right for every woman, but in general, we tend to think that we have to do this on our own, that we have to plow through by ourselves, and we maybe forget or maybe put aside the very connections that support and sustain us as people. And so I love the story of thinking about your mom, thinking about how she did so much. And I love this, without the power of LinkedIn or other social media or any other technology, but just being very simple about connecting to people. And also being very connected to her purpose, which I love that as well.
I have a friend who was also unemployed when she also transitioned from higher ed. She worked at Santa Clara, now she works at Tesla. And she, even when she got a job, she still showed up with me at the coffee shop. She's like, we're in this together. I will cry if I talk about her. I still remember she got a job 5 months before me. And she was in it. She was like, we started in this together. We will finish it together.
That's also, I think, something. I think that's a power of trying to rethink how we look at relationships with other women. There is, not often, but every once in a blue moon, there is that tendency to be unhealthy in competition. I think there's the healthy competition, right? I played sports. I played all kinds of sports. So I kind of get the healthy competition, but then there's that unhealthy competition that we have. And I think what you just shared is, you know what? Even if I get something before you, I am still going to support you 110% until you get there, right? That's beautiful. I want to move a little bit, and it's kind of on the same trajectory of thinking about courage, but really about facing fears. I think one of the things that we have learned over the years of doing this conference, as a planning team and as advisors, is the common comment about how people become so comfortable in their roles that thinking to move outside of academia is anathema, right? It's you just don't do that. And I have to find another university, or I have to find another university within the system that I'm currently in. I wonder if you could speak to this comfort zone. I actually wrote a note here, and I say it's a stable consistency or the tradition of higher ed that we become so comfortable in
100%.
that we can't even envision doing something else.
Absolutely. I'm going to make an assumption, Dr. Patrick, that you know the Queen herself, Tina Turner, and you're a fan. Folks forget the Tina Turner we know happened after 40. The Tina Turner we know, granted, of course, not to minimize everything she did before that, but the Tina Turner many of us celebrate happened after 40. So that, to me, in itself is very empowering. I did not think that there was a version of me that was different and that could be purposeful. And like I told you, that volume could go up. I thought I was a higher ed machine. The provost couldn't call me with something that I couldn't do I'd be like, yes, I'm ready. That stable, and it was so safe. It was so safe. Right. And I think about folks Queen Tina is a good example, but there are other folks that you find this other thing. You tap into something that you never knew was possible, because I think society tells us all, but specifically women and women of color, that success is a linear thing that has an expiration date. I must have this thing by then. We are told it for marriage. We are told it for children. We are told it for the acquisition of a house. Name it. The list goes on. And it is so important for me, for you, for others, for the Tina Turners of the world to tell that story. That you can. I don't know if we want to call it reinventing. I don't know what it is. I just call it to take another step. That's all it is. I just took another step, because what I was doing was staying on the step, and staying on the step is fine if that is fine for you. I just took another step, and I had to remove myself of the, oh my God, I'm in my 40s and I'm doing what now? Like, you have to be crazy, And so I love what you mentioned about realizing it doesn't have to be alone. It was hard for me to speak about my journey and not willingly give up the pieces to my partner, but he was an intimate part of that. Financially support. He also was like, he could have literally said, lady, you are off your knockers. You have a secured path in your future. What are you going to do? And he didn't. He was just like, yeah, this is great. Of course, go do that thing. And so it is hard to share that, but also to know that it is not unique. If I could do it, I promise you, you already listening, being at this session, having phenomenal session here, you all already have more information than I ever did 5 years ago. So you are already more likely to succeed than I ever did. And so it is absolutely possible. But yes, every time I listen to Tina Turner, I'm very reminded that this fantastic musician happened after 40.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to put that back on my today inspiration playlist, right? To think about that. And I love how you really highlight in your response that this happened after 40, right? The Tina that we know and have come to love happened much later in life. And I appreciate also the struggle that you are willing to share about how you were going through that for yourself, right? That I'm at X age or I'm at X stage, and other people have these expectations of me of where I've gone through it before, right? Along with you, and not literally with you, right? Right. But I understand in theory and in philosophy what that means. And it is very difficult to try to get some meaning around that and to figure out it's not linear, like you said, that it's an experience. And I love this. I want to highlight this for the women and the people who are listening out there. It is another step, period, end of story. I love that. There is something that you said a little bit earlier in your presentation, and I have this in bold now, which is to run toward, not from, or you will not be successful. Could you speak to that a little bit more? I think it kind of ties in what we're talking about now.
Yeah. So if there are folks who are my Netflix action movie watchers, think about this, right? When you're running from something, you're scared out of your mind. Your heart is racing, you're sweating, there's fear. There's no version of that you are positive, right? It's filled with a lot of fear-based human emotions, but very real. Probably exhausted even very quickly. You are looking for the next place to hide. Those things are still true when you're not in an action film. If I am running from this job, I am looking to hide. I'm looking for, I would say, an obstructed version of safe, right? We all want safety, but it's looking very different. If I am sweating and anxious, I'm now not showing up as the collaborative team member. That's not the best version of us. When you are running toward, so insert rom-com, the person comes off the plane and you're running toward them. Your heart is racing, but it is very different. You're actually not even sweating in that run. You are laughing. You are elated. There is lightness. You can run, science proves you can run further and longer when you're not doing an exasperated. So you have more in you. It's the same thing. When you are running toward, you are bringing everything that is a baggage full of positivity versus when you're running from. And so you have to, but those are very scary things for us to answer, Denise. Like when you're like, am I running toward? Because that gets very clouded by our desire to be safe. It's a very human desire. And if we don't feel safe in our workplace, you're like, oh, get me out of here. but you have to lock shop. You have to close out those things, because the way you will show up, I've seen it. I've interviewed folks where I'm like, ooh, I know this isn't you. You're running away from an unfortunate space, right? And how are
Ooh.
you showing up? And so you have to figure that out. Running towards is very different than running from. And it absolutely manifests in how you show up every day in this next pivot, adventure, and that step that you take.
I want to keep going on this one because it just speaks to so much of what our CUNY folks tend to deal with, right? I think everyone, everywhere, but specifically for our CUNY family, it's I'm going to another campus because I'm running away from this role, perhaps that I don't like, or I'm running away from, I don't know, a manager or a situation or an environment that I don't like. What are two questions that you would encourage people to ask themselves, just two, if you can think of them, that they should say, here are the two questions I need to ask in order to understand if I'm running towards something that is positive or if I'm running away from something that is negative?
Mm-hmm. So the first one is, what are your negotiables? So I won't say the name, but I've worked at many universities, and there was one in particular that folks, when they found out I had worked there, they would say, "Oh my gosh, so you work here? Can you tell me about it?" And I was like, "Wow, it's so interesting that everyone had put this school on a pedestal." And I would say, let me be clear, all my universities that I've worked for are the same. As in, I've never loved one more. Now, the experiences were different, but at different stages in my life, Denise, I was like, oh, I'm okay with the politics here. Oh, I'm okay with the students here. Oh, I'm okay with the funding. I'm okay with it. And that should change. That answer should change. There's no way that answer when I was 21 should be the same as now. Because in one role, I mean, I used to be a conduct officer, so I needed to know what did restoration look like? Did they even believe in that? What was the fund, right? Okay, and so their relationship with their campus police was very critical to the role. So you have to know. Whereas at some other schools, where I was like, oh, that didn't bother me as much, but oh my gosh, look, their work-life balance here is great. They're actually talking about their health program. I lost 75 pounds in my life, and that was at that time. So you have to be so aware of where you are in your life and know what is your negotiable, so that when you are on that interview and you're exploring, you're like, oh, I'm actually okay with that amount of funding. I've worked with that before. I will not be unhappy in this space. But if you are thinking that one place is magically better than the other, I've worked at enough institutions to say that is not it. All our institutions, I adore them, but we all have a ton of work to do. A ton of work. No campus, no, you have to know what is the thing that you're willing to bend. And so I think you ask yourself, what are you willing to bend and what are you willing to do more of? We often forget. So when you're running from, unfortunately, and you're like, oh, this place is going to be everything I need it to be. No, there are two sides of this equation. So what is it that you are willing to give more or less of? So the handshake, I knew I needed to die. Denise, I felt like I was back in high school. Like I had so much to learn. I was crying at my dining table because I didn't know this thing. It was a different world. And I had to commit to putting in hours to learning that it wasn't their responsibility to do. I had to learn those things. And so you have to know what you're willing to give more of and what are your negotiables.
That's perfect. And I appreciate too how you highlighted in these two questions that these are not externally focused kinds of questions. These are internally focused kinds of questions. These are the things where you begin inside of us, not what's the shiny object outside, because you're right. Same here. I've taught and worked at several institutions. I'm at one now in a totally different state. And every time I go on that campus, I think, wow, this is very similar to where I left, right? Where I moved from. So thank you for those two questions. I'm going to repeat them. Is one, what are your negotiables? And two, what are you willing to give more of? In the final couple of minutes that we have left, I think I want to do kind of some fun questions with you, right? Yes, we'll do like a little round of fun questions. And so here is the first one. Favorite foods?
My mom used to make the best cheesecake. And anything spicy. I had a habanero margarita the other day in Costa Rica. I was like, that's great. Love spicy.
Okay, so spicy and sweet. So it's like you like both of
And
those.
it's funny because that's the only sweet. It's her cheesecake. She never taught me how to make it, so it will go down in history. But it was her
Oh,
cheesecake. It was her
all
cheesecake.
right. I like that one. Okay, here's another one. So I know that Queen Tina is one of your faves. I'm gonna ask, what song or album have you listened to the most in the
Oh,
past, we'll say 3 months?
past 3 months. You know, funny enough, I have gone back to an Adele situation. And I wouldn't say it's a single album. I think I've gone to Spotify on Adele radio and I've just been listening to, there's something like when she sings, I feel it in my like insides, you know? It's not just surface. So she's been getting me in my feels.
I like this one. All right, and let's do one more. Favorite color or colors?
Ooh, oh, this is so sad because I didn't deck out in it for you all today, but teal. Teal is my favorite. Yeah, there's a lot of teal. You can't see it, but I love teal. And luckily it ended up becoming one of our company colors. So I have a lot of teal. It's very bright and sunshiny and effervescent. So I like the way it makes me feel.
Kind of like almost like Tiffany's colors, right?
There you go. Like that Tiffany blue. There you go.
That's right. That's right. How apropos, right? Oh my goodness. Tiffany, thank you so much for your time and for sharing such important wisdom with our audience. I really appreciate it. I know that I wish we had more time to do this, right? We always say, I wish we had more time to do this. But I think that the things that you were able to share about fear and leaning into it and knowing that it's okay to have that, leaning into pivoting and how we do that, leading into a support system, learning about what we don't know, investigate, research it, and then also understanding that a lot of what we need to do, I'm going to sum this up because it's so beautiful, is to think like Tina Turner, right? And to run to something as opposed to running from something. You are a true gem, and it's been such an honor to get to talk with you and to ask you some important questions.
The honor has been mine. Thank you all. You all have, you have a diamond in Dr. Patrick here. So the pleasure was mine. And I hope you all have an extraordinary rest of day. And good luck I know you already will start planning year 6.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. As we finish up with Tiffany, I just want to say thank you again. That was so much fun. I took a lot of notes. I hope a lot of you took notes as well. As we get ready to pivot to the next part, I just love that word. That's going to be my word for the week now. As we get ready to pivot to the next part of today's conference, allow me to share a few quick words of gratitude to this morning's speakers. First off, thank you to Senior Vice Chancellor Glenda Grace, to our CUNY Chancellor Matos Rodriguez. Thank you to Dean Graciela Moshkovsky, and also to our presidents, Larry Johnson Jr., Timothy Lynch, and to Frank Wu, for all of your insights and for the gracious way that you welcome us every year, and also for just being willing to share what your experiences have been. Finally, once again, a huge thank you to our fantastic keynote speaker, Tiffany Taylor, the Senior Director of EDU Success and Education at Handshake. Now we get to move into breakouts, and this will be the last day that you see me on here. So I just want to thank also our team of workers and volunteers for pulling all this together, and for my team also of advisors that we get to share in this. To the breakouts, please check the CUNY website for any link that you may need to get into the breakout session if you are unable to find it in an email. The first sessions will begin in about a minute and a half or so. The second set of sessions will begin at 12:30 p.m. And so I wish all of you a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for being, all of you who log in every single year. For those of you who are new to logging into this, thank you for being such an integral part of our CUNY family. And thank you, all of you, for supporting the CUNY Women's Conference Week. With that, again, I'm Dr. Denise Patrick, and I wish you all the best for today and also for our next virtual session.